Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire and the SBN Small Business Network podcast. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we have a very, very special guest. He is the founder of Band of Brothers Men's Group, and an Olympian culinary and chef. His name is Alain Dumonceaux. How you doing, Alain?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Hey, it is my pleasure to have you here. So, the number one question the audience is probably asking, who is Alain Dumonceaux?
Hey, that's a great question. You know, I'm just an average and ordinary guy just working towards being an extraordinary husband and father. And that journey didn't start that way, I'll tell you. That started off with me as a young man really wanting to learn how to cook and be like Jack Tripper and, maybe have my own apartment with a couple of ladies. And, that would be my thing and have my restaurant. But I ended up by marrying my high school sweetheart. And so we couldn't have that happen. But I did get to live a passion of mine. It still is to some extent today, and being a chef for so many years. And then, as you said in the intro there, being an opportunity to compete in the Olympics in the early 90s. And I just love things where I get opportunity to create. Today, I create more with my mind and working with men than I do with my hands, building dishes and doing things. But really, in a sense, that's really what I'm all about, is creating passion and helping men, live better lives.
Awesome. That's a great calling to have. What exactly is the Culinary Olympics?
Hey, great question. So the Culinary Olympics falls in the same 4-year cycle as the Summer Olympics, and it happens in October. And what it is around the world, culinary teams get together, usually the teams of 4 to 6 individuals, and then you can compete in what they call cold competitions. Now, these are competitions where you're preparing food ahead of time. We put this glaze on it. It's called an aspect. It makes the food look shiny and beautiful for hours on end, because the judges are going to critique you on the skill set that you had, on what the flavor profile would look like and be like. And then there's the hot side competition, and that's usually reserved for the national teams, not competed on a regional team basis. And so in competing, you have an opportunity now to create all these different dishes. And again, like I said, you have judges from around the world, scoring your piece. So it isn't like in the real Olympics where you get 1 silver, 1 gold, and 1 bronze. If you score within a certain percentage or a certain place, that's how your medals are awarded. So I was really fortunate to work with a group of talented men, many of them my mentors, even to this day, and was able to win a team silver and an individual silver.
Awesome. Like I've never heard of the Culinary Olympics before. It sounds pretty intense, though.
It was an intense 48 hours, well, a lot more than 48 hours. But once you have your date and your time of when your pieces have to be out, it takes about 48 hours of nonstop preparations, final work to be done, because you want the product to look as fresh and as vibrant as possible. And so we didn't sleep for a couple of days. And then once it was done, well, then you could enjoy the rest of the convention and look at some of your peers' work and really get an opportunity to network and learn from others.
Awesome. Sounds like it's pretty like high stakes.
Yeah, for sure it was high stakes. Back in the early 90s when I was doing it, it was predominantly men. So lots of testosterone, lots of ego. Think of Gordon Ramsay times 1,000 of all the chefs that were in there. Everyone very serious about their job, taking it their passion quite intensely. And so you had to be on your game. And if you weren't, there wasn't shy to make sure to get you back on it.
Interesting. So what inspired you to start the Awakened Man movement?
Yeah, I started this movement just prior to coming into the pandemic. So in late 2019. And the reason it happened is that while as a young man, I had married my high school sweetheart, I had also ended up by getting divorced. And just as I was turning 30, a lot of pressure was on us at the time. And I really felt that I had lost my way. And so I started doing some work with professional development and personal development and reading a ton of books. And Jack Canfield was really key. And I thought I had figured things out. And I thought that, I finally I can live to be a much better individual and human being. And then lo and behold, I just about lost my second marriage. And thankfully for me, I'm married to such a powerful woman that she was able to see the man inside of me that I needed to find. And so she gave me an opportunity to really reveal and put into practice the work that I had seen. And so when I looked for support and help systems around, there isn't anything out there for men. And then in that turmoil, as we were rebuilding our marriage, my father-in-law passed away, and he was like, I was like, he had raised two daughters. I was a son he never had. We were extremely close. He's a huge Yankees fan. I'm a huge Montreal Canadiens fan. So, we'd have great banter together. But when he passed, and I was the one who ended up by finding him, and he had an accident in the washroom, it just was devastating. Again, I found myself in a real short period of span of a play, nowhere for me to go that I could truly bare my soul and work through what I needed to. And so I decided to create space for men to be able to do that, to whatever it is that they're going through, whatever their significant emotional experience that they're going through. And so we've done that since 2020. We've been online. We do it in person. It's really an opportunity for guys to grow and learn how we can be better men in the company of others.
What do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today?
I think truly it is about our identity. We have so many mixed messages today. If we look at how society is that everything that has to do with masculinity, it's either toxic or it's bad. And I would suggest that it's the individual who's displaying habits is what needs to be corrected, versus trying to group everything as being a masculinity is poor or is not good. And so we struggle as men as identifying and being comfortable and saying that I am a masculine man. And for me, that means I have conviction about what I believe in life. I stand up for myself. I'm willing to protect those that I've loved. I'm also willing to show tough love if it's required in order to ensure that the people that we care about most, whether that's people we work with or whether they're people in our family or in our social circles, to allow everyone to grow and change as individuals. And I think for us, when we can be comfortable in what we define, how we define ourselves as men, then we can start to show up as better husbands and better fathers. And that's really been my work. And it's just interesting to see how our social conditioning over the years have really shaped how we're showing up today.
I completely agree on a lot that you touched on about the toxic masculinity that's prevalent in society.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a challenge in that what we see and what we are calling toxic masculinity. Again, I come back to, I don't think it's toxic masculinity, because I think women can be toxic as well. Toxic femininity can be involved, but is it really the woman or the man that's actually being toxic, or is it the masculinity and the femininity? And I would say it's the individual. And then I would say if they're truly acting that way and it's toxic, then there's lots of hurt there. And I'm sure you've heard the saying from, all the interviews you've done is that, hurt people. And so when we start to understand with compassion of where they're coming from, then we can approach that much differently. But instead, society today would rather see us divided and pit each other against one another. Because as long as we're fighting each other, guess what? We can't really band together and support each other and really go after the bigger issues in life. And so that's really a part of our goal, is to help us to really understand where we stand in our circle of influence and how can we influence others around us.
I completely agree with that. So what are 4 things that men lack?
I came up with this, when I was walking. I walk on a path close to my house here. It's my morning ritual. I really enjoy it. It gives me peace and quiet and an opportunity to think about. And I thought about what are the things in my life that has really put me to where I am today, and what are those things that I'm lacking? And if I had a little bit more of it, it would help. And the first thing that came to mind was I lacked commitment. And what I mean by that is I really didn't have truly a deeper why, a bigger reason to do something. And Simon Sinek talks about that in his work from a business perspective. But think about it in your own personal life. Why are you doing things? Now, I'm 59 years old, and I've I haven't been in the best shape of my life, and yet I lead men, and we talk about purpose and that. And so, am I truly committed to being the best man I can be if I'm not committed to taking care of my health? And so I decided to, if I really wanted to be committed, I'm going to hire a fitness coach. And so I did that. So first thing, I lack commitment. The second thing I realized that, well, I'm lacking commitment because I don't know how, I don't have my why, then I must be lacking some clarity. And so that forces us to take a deeper dive into the kind of person I want to be. And so one of the questions I ask the men in our group is, I want you to complete this sentence and then tell me how it resonates for you. I'm the kind of man who, and whatever you put after the word who is a part of your identity. And is that true? Is that a true statement for yourself? And if it isn't, then how can it be true? And so gaining clarity will help us get to a deeper and a more profound why. And so once I had those two figure out, well, what's the next thing that's really missing in my life? And what am I truly lacking? And that's the compass. See, that's about, I know where I'm clear on what my why is and why I'm going to do something. But now how can I put that into a vision? What does that vision statement look like? And so that once we have a vision statement, then we can say, this is my true North Star. This is the direction I'm going. It helps me make decisions on when to do things or not do things, when to say yes and when to say no. And the final thing I thought, I've been doing all this work as a lone wolf, as many of us men do, right? We're going to do it ourselves because we think that's part of what it means to be manly. And so I lacked community. I didn't have a band of brothers, somebody that I could talk to about the times that I'm struggling in, to share some of my insights of things, of journeys that I've been on that somebody else in the group is struggling with. And so once I started to recognize that if I was more committed and I was committed to something greater than I myself, I had clarity what that is, and then I could have a mission and a vision to help propel me. The only thing I need now is a community, because if you want to go fast, just go by yourself. But if we want to go far, we got to go with others. And so I think if you can recognize where you're lacking in those 4 areas, I think you'll find your life can change dramatically.
Wow, I love how you talked about community right there. How hard was it for you to find a community like that?
In locally where I live here, it was very challenging. Nothing exists unless it was part of a church group. And part of the challenge, and I purposefully wanted to make sure that this group, while we have spiritual and spirituality as it's open to all faith traditions to come and join us and be there, because I truly believe that as long as you feel that you're guided by something greater than you are, then you're welcome to be here. And so there wasn't anything. So I wanted to develop and build that. But what I found was there's so many dynamic communities online, especially out west here in Canada. I'm in Canada. Out west are some great groups. There's the Mankind Project. I'm sure all of it we're all familiar with. There's lots of groups in the U.S. focused on the Dad Edge and their work with Wagner, and then the Iron Council there with those individuals. And I think when I looked at it, I go, boy, what an opportunity right here in my own backyard to build something with a group of men that can help us become much better. And so having a community, having something for us to come to and be brothers, build brigades, I think is really key to our lives.
I completely agree that like brotherhood and bringing men together is something that is lacking in a lot of areas.
Yeah, the challenges I think we get used to, we think about men's groups and we think about it being a sports piece, right? We're sitting in the locker room, if you play hockey or football or baseball, but that's what we think about, or it's going out with the boys to the bar. And while those can be part of it, I know there's a men's group they call Dads on Tap, and they get together once a month, and and they do meet at a local pub. It's part of their thing, but they also do personal development with it. I just chose to build something that was different and focused really on in a place where there's absolute confidentiality with the conversations that are happening. If somebody's going through something extremely difficult, they need to feel safe enough that they can say what's on their mind and not get shunned. Many of us men are. You think about our youth when we're growing up, and if we happen to not be in the in crowd or that clique, we can truly feel separated. And so we work hard to make sure that there's compassionate accountability with folks. And that means that if You say, Ryan, you're going to do something, and it's been three meetings, and you still haven't got off your butt to do it. We're probably going to ask you if you're really serious about that, or would you like to change it? Maybe something else is more important to you. Maybe you want to take a stab at something a little smaller, a little bit of an easier bite size to really get the momentum so that you can stick around and really build to something greater.
Yeah, I think accountability is what a lot of men need, is someone to hold them accountable to help them grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't need, there's lots of different forms of men's work and men's groups out there. I know some groups out there that are really in your face, the Jocko Willink type of stuff, and there's Wake Up Warrior, and they're really in your face, and that attracts that type of guy, right? And that's fantastic, but not all men, not all of us are cut that way. And so I would much rather have you be the determinant on your success, and have us just play back to you what you said you were going to do, because that is usually enough for guys to turn around and do the work. And if they choose not to do the work, then they tend to move on. But I find it's a much more compassionate way to do it. It doesn't need to be for me. As I say a lot to all of our guys, I can't want your life more than you.
Yeah.
What I can do is be here for you to help you want it and help you guide you to that point.
Yeah. So one major question I have on this is, how much backlash have you gotten?
Backlash. That's pretty interesting. I don't know if I have had a lot of backlash. I've had folks for sure challenge my ideas and my position on things. Again, for circling around this idea of toxic masculinity. And I think the problem is that they're using such a broad brush when they paint it, that they get into things like, well, that's just a patriarch, and that's no longer serving us. But I think when we recognize that there needs to be a true North Star in all relationships, and starts with something greater than us, and then it is, if we're married, we're in a relationship, it is for us to lead. Because when men choose not to lead and we allow our wives to be the leader, then we end up by switching roles. And that's what ends up when men become emasculated. And, I did an interview on my podcast with a wife who talked about how she was doing that. And it's probably one of the most popular shows that I've done, because men realize, and women realize as well, that, okay, I need to stay in my space as well. And if we lead and we're there to help and support and our partners and our wives, then guess what? Then they get to show up in their feminine power. And trust me, we are attracted men to that feminine power. We're not interested in having someone be the boss babe at home. Be the boss babe all they want at work, but at home, we're looking for a different type of a relationship. But that requires work on both parties, and it requires conversation. It requires things like crucial conversations that really, so everyone can understand where they play in the role and how they can work through things. And so, I really like the stuff by G.S. Youngblood and some of his work that really helped us to get a better understanding of what the masculine looks like in relationship.
Yeah. You mean even like some of the women I've talked to, they would talk about they wish their men would lead. It's like they don't feel like they can be feminine because they're male. Their men won't lead them.
Yeah, and sometimes that comes from a position where they've had to lead. They've had to. Maybe it's their part of their life story and the things that they had to do in order to survive. And so they've had to be the decision maker, or they've had to do things, and that's how they are able to cope and to live. And so when we as men can recognize that, hey, you know what, and my wife's extremely independent, and I love her to death, but there are times where she gets too much into her masculine, and I've had to say that to her. I said, okay, what would you like done with this exactly? And have the conversation. Okay, then I can take care of that. And then there are other times that I just don't have the opportunity or the time to do it in a time frame that I know that she would like it done. But we have a conversation about it. Okay, you take care of that part, and I'm going to take care of this, and then go do it. That's the other thing with guys, is that we tend to not do that. We don't take care of things, and then that's where the feminine our wives step in and go, well, Al's not going to do it. I might as well just take care of it, because it's been like 8 times now and he still hasn't done it. So it's a work in process. It's opportunity for us to show up. And I find guys that come to our group, they've been in living those types of relationships. And so they need to learn and train themselves to have different types of conversations and to lean into things and just to take charge. Because in the end, that's what they want. The women in our lives want us to take charge, take the decision-making off their plate, especially if you're raising a family with young kids.
Yeah. Well, they always said that was one of the original sins too in the Garden of Eden, was Adam didn't lead Eve. So, which
That's
she,
right.
she fell into sin because he wasn't leading her. So,
yeah, that's right. He was busy doing whatever he was doing, and he wasn't showing up as he needed to. And part of that still exists today, right? And so, like I said earlier, especially when you're raising young families, your wife is making 1,000 decisions a day, taking care of the kids, getting things looked around. And then when we come home, I know we're busy, gentlemen. We have lots on our plate as well, but it doesn't give us the right to acquiesce the rest of the day to our wives and allow them to just do everything and not be there and be supportive. And so it takes conversations, it takes opportunity to check in. And my wife and I have been pretty good with having a weekly check-in. And I learned this from some individual, I can't remember now, brain cramp, but they said, what's your relationship on a scale of 1 to 10? And if it's anything below a 7, what do I got to do to get it back to a 7? And it's been really beneficial for us, especially if you can get past the superficial stuff more than, hey, can you get the garbage out and pick up the laundry? What do I need to do to show up? What can I do? What could I do differently this week that would help you feel closer, to help us be more connected, and then sit there and listen for that answer.
Nice. So how would you recommend that men get closer to their wives and communicate a little bit better?
Yeah, I think one of the best things to do is to ask, some open-ended questions, right? So the questions that aren't going to end up with a yes or no answer. And so asking questions about what is something that I did, what is something that maybe don't even start with yourself. How about start with, what is something that made you smile today? What was something that, brought joy in your life this week? And then have that as being the opening conversation, and then just listen. And when she's done talking, then follow up with, well, tell me more about that. Just tell me a little bit more. And that starts the conversation rolling. And then you can get into more personal stuff. Is there something that I did this week that made you smile? And stop and listen. Is there something that I could do differently that would have supported you more? And it's those types of open-ended questions, and every relationship is going to be a little different, but it helps you start to build a foundation so that now when there's conversation to be had, you can do that. And I would structure time in it. We structure Sunday evening for it. It's usually, it's an opportunity for us to wind down from a busy week. We have a gorgeous backyard, and, thanks to my wife and her work, and we have a nice fire pit. And so we'll sit there and have a conversation about the week in our lives and where we're going and what's on the plate, on the agenda for the upcoming week, to make sure that we're touching base and connecting and understanding what's up for each other. So there's no misunderstandings, or there's no mind reading happening, or at least reducing the mind reading down to a bare minimum. I think those are keys for us to help us really get more connected. And the last option I'll give you is, go back to date nights. We alternate every second Friday. So we have 2 Fridays in the month where it's wide open, but every second Friday, I got the second Friday of the month and she has the fourth. It's their turn to plan or my turn to plan. And we go with whatever our partner asks. It's about an opportunity to explore things that they're interested in, gets us out of our comfort zone, gets them out of their comfort zone. We've done things like go to dancing lessons. We've gone to baseball games, right? My wife's a big golfer. We've gone golfing. We've done lots of interesting things. So it's an opportunity to reconnect at a different level, and you get to learn something that you probably didn't know about your partner when you start to plan like that.
I like that idea of like letting them plan something, you just have to go do it. So it does make you step out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And more than just a dinner and a movie, although that might be it. There might be a great movie that everyone's looking forward to go seeing, but to put a little thought in it, what are the things that she likes to do? And yes, guys, it means we're probably going to have to get out of our comfort zone, going to take dancing lessons. Not that suave of a dancer, so it was quite interesting to be with my wife, to say the least.
So in your opinion, is wisdom or knowledge more important?
Yeah, I think they're both important, but wisdom comes from knowledge. And so before we can gain any wisdom, we need to first have some experience. And, I like this idea of gaining wisdom through being involved or through theory. And so I think this was an idea that I got from Patrick Bet-David. He talked about having the TWA idea of having wisdom. T stands for theory. You can read all the books that you want. You can, study, take all the courses. And that's what happened to me in the early days. And then I just never put it into practice. So I was gaining knowledge. It was really important. But then I didn't put it into practice. And so if I don't put it into practice, then I'm not gaining the wisdom from that experience. And the next way we can, gain knowledge and especially more wisdom is through witnessing or spending time witnessing. That's kind of what men's work is about. It's being able to spend time around others who've experienced things I didn't get to experience directly, but I'm in touch with somebody who has, and I can learn a lot from that. It helps me as I go through my experience. And then the final way of that is through the authority. So we're actually with somebody who has experienced it. And so we get an opportunity to truly learn and gain wisdom from them and their experience. And so if we can put ourselves in a position where we can be in front of people that have some authority in something that we're trying to learn, we can take the knowledge, imply that wisdom that we're getting from them, and really gain a depth far greater than we can by just doing any one of those three individually.
I love how you said, like, you can learn as much as you want, but if you don't put in practice, it's not going to help you.
Yeah, 100%. I can't imagine how many hours and dollars I spent on courses and training and all this, and then to sit there and go, okay, buddy, are you going to implement any of this? And, all it takes is a life event. I call them a significant emotional event for us to finally wake up. It's unfortunate that it takes that for many of us, but then we get a chance to really, deploy the stuff that we've learned. And when we do that, then we start to gain some real insight into who we are. Because, I think pressure reveals character, doesn't build it. I think it reveals who we truly are. When the proverbial crap hits the fan, how are we going to show up? And how we show up is get real insight about who we are. And then at least we have a waterline, a base level that we can work from and start to develop and change.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And then how you touched on, most men, I think, learn from them bad moments and a lot of failure.
Yeah, and you see that in sports, right? And so I think about the sports team. I'm a big hockey fan, and so you see these teams that make it to the Stanley Cup final, or they get to the Western and the Eastern final, and then they don't get it. They don't go any further, and then the next year they get to the Cup final, and then it's the next year, and they finally win it. Because we learn through adversity. When stuff's going well, are you really paying attention to learn anything? I'll suggest that most of us are not. But when we go through adversity, it's the forging of that fire of pain that helps us find purpose and action. And when we are in that middle of it, it's tough to see it because we're in the middle of it. But if we get an opportunity to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are the lessons I can learn from this? How did I prepare? What could I do differently on the next time this shows up? And start to do that work. And you can do that by yourself, but it's a lot more effective when you do it in community, because you get to bounce ideas off each other. And we have lots of exercises that I put guys through to really get a better handle on how they're going to show up when the pressure's on.
So you touched on it a little bit. So why is having a purpose and mission important for you and other men?
Yeah, purpose and mission, I think, is the reason gets us out of bed in the morning. If we don't have that, then we can have all the aspirations and inspiration that we want, but it doesn't mean anything. It actually ends up by just sitting on the bedroom floor. And so having mission and purpose gives us a sense of being, of something we can attach ourselves to. And it needs to be something different and bigger than our jobs. And for many men, we have our jobs as our identity and our mission and our purpose, right? That, I just want to be excellent in business, or I want to be an excellent leader. And those are great. But what if you go back to that question, that statement I asked the guys to finish, I'm the kind of man who, if you said I'm the kind of man who is a leader, what does that mean? What does leader mean? Define that. And when you start to define what it is that who and what you are, then you can start making different decisions about things. And if you don't have that as a central guiding feature, then you're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle and flounder, and you're just never going to really get off the ground. You'll make some progress, but you're not going to make the progress that you should be making, because there isn't something that's compelling and pulling you forward. Because trust me, there's going to be days, going through it right now with my fitness coach, I don't really want to do the workout, coach. And guess what he's saying? Yeah, you're going to do it, Al. And he's absolutely right. I will. But, if we're going to try to live life through motivation, we are going to struggle. Motivation is very, very short living. And so we need to have something deeper, a bigger why. And, my bigger why took me to have a grandson. He's 7 years old now. And the last time I saw him, I had a hard time running around with him in the backyard. And I'm going, I'm only 59, man. I'm not 89 or 99. Give me a break. And so that was the catalyst. A bigger why for me was, I want to be able to enjoy my grandson. And I can't do that if I'm out of shape, I'm not eating right, not taking care of myself. And so it can be something as simple as that. It can be whatever it is for you that pulls you forward, and then you just latch onto that. And that's what I think about in the morning when I don't want to get up at 5:30 to go on my walk, and just think, nope, I need to go do that walk, because I got to be able to keep up to the little guy.
I love how you touched on purpose and motivation. Like, I always tell everybody that, like, motivation is more of a feeling, and your purpose is going to be the fuel to get you there.
Yeah. I love that. Absolutely.
You recently co-authored Relationship for Men by Men. What's it about?
Yeah. So this was a book I co-authored with 10 or 15 other gentlemen, and it was an opportunity for us to share our different perspectives on what it means to be in relationship. And so in that book, my chapter talked a lot about how my identity was as a 20-year-old and, marrying my high school sweetheart, and how everything in that relationship was about me and my goals, and not about my relationship with my wife. And so the chapter really was about eye-opening, and it's an opportunity for people to recognize, men, to recognize when we have so much focused on one aspect of our life, we can start to take the rest of our life for granted. And when we do that, then generally speaking, bad things are going to happen. And so the lesson of that chapter is really for us to take a break and to recognize that we can't go anywhere in life, in relationship, without having support, and having the strong support of, a spouse. We had just started having kids. So my oldest was 3. Youngest was 1. My oldest, when I was going to the Olympics, was just born. Like, he was 6 months old. But I was so focused on my career, because I thought if I just focused on the career, I could bring home the bacon and do well, then everything would be okay. But guess what? My wife needed more than money in the bank. That's important. But she needed a partner, somebody to show up who could support and help her. And like, we're first-time parents, right? We're in our mid-20s, and there's no owner's manual for children. Like, how are we going to do this? And so part of the book was for each of us to pick a piece of a relationship that we've had experience in, and if we could tell the story and teach a lesson, and then provide some resources. And so the resource at the end of that chapter for me was helping men write their mission and purpose statement. And I call it the return of the king. And it's a great opportunity for them to look at values and beliefs and really get a sense about who they are.
Nice. So what kind of insight can women get about men through this book?
Well, I think you're going to truly get there. All the chapters are written by men. And so you're going to get an opportunity to crawl into our minds. And I know you, like many women out there, my wife included, tries to be a mind reader. Guess what? Most of the time it's a bad read, right? And so the reason is because we're just kind of all over the place in our brain. And so this is an opportunity where you get a really succinct story, a really succinct lesson about what's happening for us and how we showed up. And probably one of those, I would hope that one or two of those chapters is going to resonate with you, what's going on in your life. And you can see what the resolution was, or a possible resolution was, for that individual. And it gives you opportunity to approach your husband or boyfriend from a different perspective. Because I think that's really the struggle in relationships, right? When we tend to be in battle, we're in battle because we don't want to give up our position. And our position has come from everything that we've learned. And if we can just open up enough space to allow and get a different perspective, then we have different outcomes for those battles. And so I think women really want to get an understanding of what's going on in a guy's head. You should pick up that book.
Yeah. There's been a major attack on the family and its values in the past 20 years. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think they've been cooking this frog pretty slow, so we have yet to jump out of it. And I think as a society, part of the challenge is that, we've been taught to believe that we needed two parents working out of the home because we have to buy stuff. We have to be consumers. And instead of being consumers, we need to be consumers of relationship and family. And so we have allowed ourselves to just acquiesce our upbringing of our children to the school system. We've allowed the upbringing to now I'm part of that era of the latchkey kids, right? And so, there's daycares and everything else going on. So what? So mom and dad can be busy. And worse yet, now we're seeing more and more, single parent homes. And it's not very often that it's a single parent is the father. And so as men, we're also not owning our role in that aspect and standing up for it. And I know I'm in Canada and in the US, the rules are slanted more towards women. But I would argue to say that if we show up as powerful men that we are, that we can tilt that scale back. And I know that's what I did when we were separated there in my early 30s. Is I did everything I could to make sure that I could be and participate with my kids. And I think when we can come back and really recognize that we just don't need all this stuff that society says that we need, and we need to be solid in what's important to us. And I think because we've removed, religion and guiding posts out of our society and out of our school systems and out of everything, then we have only ourselves to lead us. And I think it's been pretty well proven that as individuals, and we're not really great at guiding ourselves, and we need something much greater. That's why we've been talking about mission and vision and purpose this whole episode. And so I think it's been a slow deterioration, and we need to step back and come back and recognize what's truly important. And that's coming back to the family unit and taking control over what's happening with our kids, what they're being taught. And if we don't like what's being taught, to make change with that. And hopefully we can get to a point in society where, I know for us here in Canada, we pay our property tax and it automatically goes towards the school divisions. I would really like to see a day where we get an opportunity to decide where those hard-earned tax dollars are going. And so we can have a bit more control over what's going on. I think it's just really important that we do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that we've let ourselves kind of be led astray on all that, and men have lost their purpose and control of the family unit completely.
Yeah, and I think you got to think of it too. And this slow boil has been going on for forever. You think about, we came from an era where it was Archie Bunker right? So, the bigoted father to what, everybody loves Lucy, and there was no real strong family image. And then you got, Ada's enough. And you think about all these TV shows, and then Homer comes along and he's a goofball and doofus. And that's the role model we have for men.
Yeah.
Right. And so we think that, well, that's what dad is. He's not smart. He doesn't know what he's doing. Mom's going to have to take care of everything. And we as men have bought into that as well, and while there's comedy in there and it's good to have a chuckle, it's also understand that it's also a slow change of the idea of what men it should be. And so then when you have a strong personality, like the US has right now, then everything that individual does is toxic. And I would suggest that, some of it may be, but for a large part of it, it's because of how far we've flung over to being emasculated. And so anything that time that a man stands up and says what's on his mind and puts his proverbial foot down on things, then it's just like, well, that's the patriarch, and that's a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I would suggest let's take ownership about where we're at today. And if everybody does their part, we'd have a lot less of that.
Yeah. You host the Revolutionary Man podcast. What type of advice do you give for men on there?
Yeah, so we give advice about everything from relationships to business to health. We spend a lot of time on mission, vision, and purpose. And then I also have guests on. And so the opportunity is for us to learn from other individuals. And so the catalyst, the reason I started the show was really as an interview-based show to begin with. And because what I wanted to find was individuals, men who had gone through a traumatic experience, that significant emotional experience, and then we're able to turn that into something much greater. And so they've lived their hero's journey. And so we always talk about that as the opening question for my guests, to talk about that life and death experience for them that transformed who they are. What was the lesson that they learned? And then from my own experience, I talk about the lessons that I've learned from, my childhood coming through to with the Culinary Olympics, and, grieving and having to deal with that, as an adult, and what that's all about. And so we try to touch on really the 6 pillars in life. And so anywhere from, it's some financial advice, emotional, physical stuff. So I had fitness guys, NFL players on there, spiritual, professional, of course, relationships, and touch on a little bit of everything. It's a weekly show, and, I've been getting some good feedback.
Nice. What is one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's struggling in their relationship?
If you're struggling in a relationship, the first thing I'd ask you to do is, what's your impact on what's happening in the relationship? I'm not asking you to own all of it. I'm asking you to own your part. And so what part are you playing in the relationship? And how you can have a better understanding of that is, jot down what are the things that are upsetting you about the relationship. Because what is happening is you're being mirrored what's making you upset. And so you can start that as a place to understand what's going on. And so if you're struggling in your relationship, look at where are the things that are upsetting you, and then how are you showing up in those moments? Because the moment that we can take responsibility for who we are, for where we are, then we can take responsibility for who we want to become. We have to start with the decisions that we've made that put us in the situation that we're at. It's nobody else's fault. We've trained each other in our relationships to show up as we are. If we want something different, then we need to retrain ourselves first so that we can then lift others up and take them along with us on the journey.
Yeah, completely agree on that. Accountability is so important in that, to own up to your part.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't want to do that because that means, then some people feel like it's all mine, and you may have those conversations. Well, yeah, it's all you. Like, you're the one who messed it up. Yeah, 100%. I have done the deed, whatever the deed is. However, having done that deed, what led up to it? What were the other things that were happening? How did I train my partner to respond? Because I didn't stand up. And so, as I said earlier about losing my second relationship, I had allowed my wife to basically emasculate who I was. And I did that because I would say to myself, well, what is this argument going to mean in a year from now? And for the most part, the answer to that is nothing. However, when that becomes a crutch and you never stand up, even for the slightest little thing, no, I don't think you should cut the lawn horizontally. I think you should go vertically. And you have a conversation just to have it. Then you can start to build skill set to have the much more challenging conversations around sex, money, religion, the things that, values, the things that are important in your life. But if you're not willing to even go there because you don't want to be in conflict and you'd rather be a nice guy, then we end up by saying to our partners that that's okay, that you can behave this way because I have no boundaries and it's all right. It's, I just want to be a nice guy. And I think it's really key that we understand that it's how we're showing up. The reason the relationship is in turmoil is because I've done something in it, and how can I change and what can I do? And so that's a lot of the work that we do in our group.
Nice. How important has personal development and upgrading your mindset been on your journey?
Oh, it's been phenomenal, man. I got to tell you, the first book that I picked up, if you don't mind, I don't mean to turn my back to you folks, but
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I picked up this book as right out of the gate. It's Ogmandino's A University of Success. And I have to tell you, look at how tore up and worn out it is. This thing is I probably read this thing 24, maybe more times, because in it, he's got 50 of the classic self-help books and there's excerpts on it. Sometimes the whole thing, the entire book's in there, but it was a catalyst for me to go back. And so I remember we talked a little bit about what's more important, knowledge or wisdom. You got to start somewhere. This was great knowledge for me, and it helped me lead me to other great authors, other great ideas and concepts about what makes me tick, what makes people tick. And so I think, I think it was Jack Canfield talked about, buy books and buy lots of them. Like he'll buy a book and he'll buy dozens of them because he's going to give them all out. Right. And so buy lots of books. You're still going to gain something from them, even if they're in the presence, especially if it's an author that you enjoy. And, one of the tips that I used when I was first learning personal development is I would, fall on the same type of authors, would be a Jack Canfield. But then I started going, okay, if I want to read about self-esteem, who else can I read on? Well, Nathaniel Braden, I'll read some of his stuff. And then you start to explore and change. And again, you gain not just knowledge, but you're expanding your wisdom. You're getting different ideas. And so I had a mentor years ago. He said, if you're not green and growing, you're ripe and rotten. And so that always stuck in my mind. Hey, it's been a long time since I've opened a book. I listened to a podcast, I've done anything with personal development. It's time to go back to that. And sometimes it's just re-listening or rereading an old a book I've had on the shelf for a while, or it's getting something new. And so I think if you're truly serious about improving yourself, there's so much great content out there. There's no lack of information.
I completely agree with you on that. And you kind of stole my next question was, what was one book you'd recommend for personal development or mindset?
Well, the Og's University of Success for sure was a massive one for me. And like I said, it's a real easy read. I got to have a quick book look over there. Those are some of my favorites. I think you got to find the thing that really fits for you. I'll go back to Jack Canfield. While this was a great book, this Og's book, the very first thing that I listened to after losing everything was Jack Canfield's back. Remember Nightingale Conant? You used to get the cassettes, the 6 cassettes in a package, right? I still have a bunch of those, by the way. And it was Self-Esteem and Peak Performance. I listened to that 6 cassette set so much that I wore it out. But I also, at one point, had memorized the entire workshop. It was just, you find something, it resonates in your heart. It makes you feel good. You sit there and you're reading and you're listening, and next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. You've hit the Holy Grail. And so pick whatever that piece is for you. Like I said, I go back to some old classics because I know what I'm going to end up by reading, and I generally have the same inspired feeling after looking at it. And so for sure, find that one for yourself.
Nice. What are your short-term and long-term goals?
Yeah, my short-term goals is I still work full-time for a living. And so short-term in the next couple of years, I'll pull the plug and retire. And then that puts me in a position. My long-term goals is to truly take the Awakened Man and our Band of Brothers group and expand it to nationally across Canada. And so this opportunity is for me to really lean into the thing that I'm totally passionate about, that I race home with every night, to get in front of the computer and do a little bit more work and plan the next month's lesson. And so short term, looking forward to retiring, to move on to something much greater, which is a true passion of mine. It's to help men become the best husbands, fathers, and leaders.
I love that. How can people get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is to go to theawakenedman.net. That's our main website. In the website right now, there's a free download that you can get. It's called Setting the Compass. It's an opportunity for you to review how the last 12 months of your life have gone. And in the end, you'll write at the end of the last exercise is you'll write a headline, like a newspaper headline, for what would describe that 12 months. And then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for the upcoming 12 months. And ultimately write your headline for the next 12 months. And so it's a free download. It's an opportunity to get a flavor for the kind of stuff that we do here at the Awakened Man and our Band of Brothers.
Nice. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
The only last thing I would say is that there's so many opportunities for us to really engage in lives. And men, we have to really be willing to get out of our comfort zone. And so one of the things that I know that I struggled with was really being this idea of being an imposter. And there's going to be times in your life when you probably feel like that. But realize that being in the imposter syndrome is really on a self-acceptance scale. And so I'm going to ask you to ask yourself how you're feeling. Is this really true? Because most likely it's just a story that you've put into your mind and you've built it over time. And most likely there's ways that it is untrue. And then I ask you to consider the times when you were successful in life, and that'll help you start to get out of that rut. And then when you do that, then that may give you the opportunity and the courage to reach out, join a men's group, whether that's mine or the one near your community, to really start to become the best husbands, fathers, and leaders, because that's what society and the world is asking of us. It may not feel like that, but that's what we're doing. So fight that imposter syndrome guy. He's not real. It's all made up. Let's go take care of that dude.
I love it. Great advice. Final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
The overcoming adversity is an opportunity for us to truly forge who we are as men. And so when you're in the pit and you're in the fire, to take an opportunity to just take a breath, to relax, to know that you've been here before. And maybe the last time you were there, it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, but today is a different time. It's a different opportunity. So take a moment. What can I do in this moment? How can I change my reaction? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to do something different? Call a friend, whatever that is. But take a moment and pause. Most of the time, what ends up when we're in adversity, we will tend to either completely shut down and not do anything, or we will just push through because we just don't want to feel it. Especially when you're going through things like grief, and different opportunities like that. And so if you just take a moment just to pause and let yourself and remind yourself that I know I've been here before, and this time is going to be different and it's going to be better. And then ask, what can I do next? And just listen. I promise you that if you do that and listen and just take a moment, it will come to you right away. Don't discount it. Don't throw it away. Just act on it. And I guarantee you it'll be the most positive step you can make when you're in the middle of it.
Some great advice right there. Alain, I want to thank you very much for coming on here and giving us some insight. I think you have a very, very strong mission and purpose in life.
Thank you so much, my friend. I really enjoyed our conversation, and you're doing some amazing stuff work here as well. Just remember that I think that, the more times that we get together and spend times like this with each other, we get a chance to spread more information and opportunity to the world. And so keep up the great work, Ryan. Just love the work you're doing, bud.
Hey, thank you very much. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is go through the fire.